Hey, this week we're going to be talking to a rep who had learning disabilities, wanted to become a doctor, but that wasn't in the cards for him. So he got into sales, of course, your next second choice. And he now sells to surgeons in the operating room. It's a great story. And I think before you start listening to it, I want you to really think about not limiting yourself to your business acumen, learning about your customers, and understanding the power when you do. Too many reps I talk to get overwhelmed with this. They're like, how can I learn all that stuff? One day at a time, 15 minutes at a time. That's how you just start small and you start learning. And once you are able to talk to them, your clients, about what they care about and why they should care about it, that's the switch. I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. Let's get into it. I'll sum it up at the end, and I'll update everybody on the courses. We're starting to cook right now, doing a lot of case studies, tons of one-on-ones. I'll describe what those are at the end. And before we get into it, make sure you're checking out Co-Video. Video email is the way to kick it this year. Not only are you showing yourself, but you can show screens. You can show your product, you can show their website, you can show the difference, you can show your clients' websites. You can communicate so much more visually than you can just in text. It just doesn't cut it anymore. Come on, check it out, covideo.com. Here we go. Hey, Tyler, welcome to the show. As we're getting started, tell us about yourself.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on. Where to start? So I always enjoy hearing people's backgrounds. So I guess I'll start there.
Yeah.
I'm a Midwest guy, so I grew up in Kentucky and I live in Cincinnati now, but I grew up on a farm. And the interesting thing about my upbringing was one side of my family was farming background. And then my entire dad's side of the family was medical, all orthopedic surgeons primarily. So I had my heart set on. But
you lived on a farm.
I lived on a farm. It was a blessing because there's a lot of commonalities between farmers and doctors that you wouldn't expect. They're both very creative and like to do things with their hands, particularly surgeons. And I felt like both sides of the family had the mentality that anything could be done.
Yeah. What type of farm was it? Growing stuff or animal farm or?
Black Angus cattle.
Wow. That's real farm.
Yeah. So, and then, so I went to college with the plan of being a doctor, and I had always struggled mightily with school. So I don't know why I thought that would work.
Yeah.
But as it turned out, I switched to business and, call it fate or whatever. I ended up being able to marry two interests by getting into medical sales. So
cool.
It was kind of a great little thing to find out. And then after my MBA program, that's when I was diagnosed with some learning disabilities. So much too late in life to go back and do it over. But I started sort of relearning everything at that point.
What, dyslexia or?
I never got tested for dyslexia, though my son has, and he has dyslexia and ADHD, and they're both commonly linked. So I guess there's a possibility there, but definitely ADHD.
Okay. Yeah. I had dyslexia and didn't find out until I was in my late 20s. So
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think whenever you find it out, it's good.
Well, you're told you're lazy your whole life and you're like, well, I don't know if I can work any harder.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Reading anything, retention wise and reading was always a challenge. I explain it to my wife now that we're helping my son. I'm like, it was like reading a typewriter. You get to the end of one line and then you have to go back and do it all over again because you didn't pick any of it up. So.
Yeah. I always said, the alphabet looked like a Chinese food menu to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And people, what are you talking about? People just can't understand.
No, but I think the brain works in mysterious ways. And, I think that there tends to be a lot of creativity and other strengths that come along with people whose brains work that way. So,
yeah. Malcolm Gladwell did a several chapters on David and Goliath in his book about
Oh yeah.
dyslexics having enormous success. But on both ends of the spectrum, a lot more prisoners have dyslexia than the normal population, and a lot more very successful people have it.
Yeah.
So it's like a lot of things in life. It's like, what do you do with it?
Yeah, I think when you think differently, it can be a blessing and a curse.
Yes.
And it just depends on what you do with it.
Yeah. So what was it like getting into sales?
So getting into sales was another adventure, I'll say, very similar to my adventures of school. It wasn't initially very easy. And
No, people just didn't call you up and say, "Hey, man, what do you sell? What do you got?"
No, I think I was terrible at it. What was interesting about it is, I remember I almost would say that sales chose me. I saw it as a way to get back into medicine, and I took on a role where you were thrown to the wolves, and they would put you in territories that were open. They wanted a young guy that could travel, and they would say, well, you can, fill in for this maternity leave in Atlanta, Georgia until somebody comes back. And you didn't get the lay of the land or prospects or anything. So for some reason, I've always been very determined, and I just kept pushing. And I think it was the best thing that could have happened to me because I learned so much just from all the mistakes I was making.
And take us through that. What was it that first year like? Because a lot of people out there are experiencing it and they think it's them, as opposed to, hey, you're just being thrown in the middle of the pool. It's time to learn to swim.
Yeah. I tell people all the time when I'm mentoring people that are starting, I say it's a roller coaster, and when you haven't been in the end zone yet, you haven't felt that first win.
Yeah.
It's easy to think you just don't have what it takes. As those wins start piling up over your career and you get confidence, you always are going to have those dips in selling. And the more wins you have in your bag, the more you're confident that this too shall pass. But that first year was tough.
Yeah. And who were you calling on? Who was was it a company? Was it a persona, a particular type of person?
So you never just jump into medical sales. So I should say I did 2 years of B2B, selling ocean and air freight forwarding for UPS. And I did okay at that. But then when I got into medical sales, you're selling to surgeons. And if you know anything about medical sales, you're in the OR with the surgeons, a lot of time guiding them through procedures. So you can imagine showing up in Atlanta, Georgia, as like you're dropped out of a helicopter and you're asked to find the OR, walk in, fresh-faced, looking like some kid just showed up in your OR, and you've got to be both, viewed as a resource and a value add to that OR, and try not to get kicked out. So I was selling to surgeons.
Well, how do you get the credentials to even get in?
Yep.
I'm sure there's not just this revolving door with a tourist.
No. And thank goodness for that. You have to go through a ton of training prior to that. Now I think they have device sales colleges where you'll get more credentialing. But back then you would have to go through whatever the hospital credentialing system was and be up to date with all your bloodborne pathogens and training. And, they do background checks, make sure you're not a criminal and all that stuff.
And you're in the physical operating room? Or are you outside or in the theater or in the waiting room or?
No, in device sales, you're in the physical operating room. You're scrubbed. You'll have scrubs on. And if I would have had a beard like this back then, they would have had me put the little goofy mask on my beard even.
Yeah.
So you're in there. And I always tell people when they're getting surgeries now, you want a rep in there because they're specialized in learning that specific device or that specific equipment. And they know every possible thing that could go wrong with it. And so, if you're a surgeon trying to work quickly because you don't want to keep patients under anesthesia for too long, you time is of the essence. So it's good to have a rep in there.
So they would call on you for feedback, expertise, advice. Is that right?
Yeah, the role is called a surgical sales specialist. So in addition to, trying to expand your products within that hospital system, one of your main roles was to be the local resource to help them navigate the devices and products.
And let's say, the key is to build trust with them so that they will talk to you.
Immediate trust and bring value. You had to come in. I learned quickly you had to come in with some value add. Otherwise, you were not going to last long in that OR.
And talk to us about that, because everyone used that word value, but very few people define it. And it really doesn't matter what we think it is. It matters what the other person thinks it is.
That's exactly right. I think the key to bringing value is you have to understand their world so well that what you're going to be offering is actually going to be something that they want to receive.
And do you have an example of that, or?
I'll tell you one story that comes to mind. I was in an OR in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was actually there for a different procedure. And the OR tech, so the OR techs would be the ones that are helping scrub in and help the physician with the procedure. So the OR tech steps out and he comes across and he's like, Tyler, we think Dr. So-and-so, might need your product. She's been in this procedure now for a long time. And it was a morcellator that I had, and she was trying to do it in an old school way. And it was just a very calcified fibroid. So I get in the OR and knew the personality of this physician and knew she was not going to welcome me in there. And so I basically walked in and introduced myself, and I said, I heard that this is a extremely challenging case, and I just want to be here for your patient to make sure that in the event that you do need something, then I'm here. So Don't for a second think I'm here to sell you anything, but I would hate for you to waste any time. Yeah. So then I just was quiet and watching her work and kind of looking for my place, because I didn't have any time to, prepare or come up with some sort of value. So I'm watching this procedure, and as she's working on this fibroid and I'm looking at the camera, I just realized how calcified it is. And I said, with the modality you're using, it wouldn't matter how long you worked at this thing. I think this could take hours. I said, with the fibrous tissue of this fibroid, I think that, this morcellator may actually work pretty well. And she was quiet. She didn't say anything. I was like, and then, stepping on some toes. But I think she knew what I was saying, made sense. Yeah. And so she said, not to me, but she said to the techs, let's go ahead and use that device. So luckily, like I said, I had everything there ready to go, so that we weren't wasting any time. And she started working, and it was like she was an old hat at it. She just, blew through the fibroid and finished up the case in like 10 minutes. And when the case was over, what I ended up finding out is that when she was in private practice and would do procedures in her office, a rep had sold her on a terrible contract that she couldn't get out of, and these devices kept piling up. And so she'd hated reps. Yeah. And by just sitting there and listening and getting that information out of her, I was like, I agree. Like if I had to ever be in a situation like that, I'd have the same sort of feeling of resentment. I said, how about this? If you think this device can benefit patients, you can approve prior to me being there, utilization. And she was also worried about cost. And, the other modality was essentially free, whereas this was a disposable. And I said, as long as you factor in time, because how much time is built out in the OR, as long as you factor that in and you decide, I said, I'll share the pricing with you, and just factor in time. And from that point on, she realized that 90% of the cases, even though it might be a more expensive device, it was going to save money and OR time.
And that's it. It wasn't her money either, is it? It's the hospitals, the patients, the Medicaid, Medicare, the insurance companies.
Yeah, it's not her money in that case, but they're all tasked with keeping costs low with with the new healthcare mandates, and so it is part of their scorecard.
Really?
Keeping their costs low. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it'd be just the opposite. Because their malpractice insurance is probably their most expensive cost, isn't it? I'm not a doctor, and
Yeah.
the last thing on earth I would like to be is in an operating room under any context.
Yeah. Well, no, you're exactly right. I think malpractice is a huge expense. Anymore, they're almost all owned by the hospital, which, and that was the case then. She hadn't been in private practice for a while. But when you're owned by the hospital,
I see.
That's the hospital will task and measure you on costs as well. So.
Yeah. And just for the people who are listening, how long did it take and how did you learn all this stuff? Because you didn't go to medical school, and it sounds complicated.
Yeah. The interesting thing was I found out about the ADHD, and I'd had a lifetime of trial and error and things that had seemingly helped me learn. And one thing that was always true is if I liked the subject, and this was probably the case for you as well.
Yeah.
If you like the subject, you could learn the subject matter fairly easily. But you would go through, 2-3 month training and testing, and you'd have to pass tests on the products and anatomy on whatever the product would be. But then you would also, you would be in maybe 5-6 cases a day. And so you're learning quite a bit, not to mention I was traveling around the country, and experiencing different hospital systems. So
did you have like a mentor or somebody that you could like talk through these, complicated things, because it's a whole new vocabulary. It's not even common everyday English. It's very technical words. And
I've always had a lot of mentors.
Yeah.
they would assign you a mentor, and then I would also identify people that I knew could teach me things, and I continue to have lots of mentors.
And was your dad in this space? The doc? No, it was a different type of medicine.
So it was my dad always called himself the black sheep. Unfortunately, he passed away this past spring, but I think he was likely, we won't know, but I think he probably had the same dyslexia, ADHD thing.
Yeah.
He was the one that didn't go into medicine. So.
Oh, it was your mom that went into medicine?
It was my dad's family. The entire family's in medicine except for him. He called himself the black sheep. Yeah.
No, because I think a lot of reps kind of shy away from, learning the problem domain of their customer. And they try and stay just at, this is what we do, this is how it's different, this is why you should buy it. And that's not the way customers think. They look at their problem, their world, and how are you going to make it better?
Right.
Like in your case, that person was doing something that was infinitely less effective than what you could offer.
That's absolutely right. I mean, you're trying to shift perspective in a very tactful way.
Yeah.
And one of the things I love about what you're doing in your podcasts and a lot of what you're communicating about sales is that, I think in one of your recent podcasts, you said it's not about a method, it's about a system.
Yes.
Because you have an engineering background, is that right?
Yeah, I was a software engineer, and it played into the dyslexia because when you write software, it's not English.
Right.
Okay. Right. So you're coming up with non-English words and symbols for things. And I was able to visualize that in my head. And I liked doing it because you got immediate feedback from the computer.
Right.
And you could do it without having to be in a classroom and deal with other people.
That's exactly right. And I think that's what sales is too. They teach a method.
Independent. Yeah.
That, I can't tell you how many methods I've been taught, selling, challenger sell.
But right. But
it's not about a method.
That's a skill though.
Right.
Like sales is much more like an operation. It's from scrubbing and planning, communicating, situating everybody, anticipating things that could go wrong, and then 100% focus, that flow state that those surgeons get in, right? Just anybody messes with them, you're out of that room in a second. Right?
Absolutely.
They're in the zone.
Yeah.
And they have to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where the system comes into play.
Yeah.
You develop your own system based off all of your experiences and all your training. It's not that you don't learn from the sales methods that you're taught. You do, but you have to create your own system.
Right.
And that's when you hit your stride.
That's it, because everybody thinks, because we're not pitchers, meaning that all we do is one function. We throw strikes. But
exactly.
we're playing the whole game, right? And in baseball, we get the wrong metaphor because, they swap out a hitter for the pitcher, right? Because pitchers don't spend any time practicing hitting the ball. They spend all their time doing one thing. But in sales, we're doing the whole thing.
Yeah, you have to see it from all sides.
Yeah. And no matter how great an insight or questions that you have for that surgeon, you still have to close the deal. You have to keep momentum with it. They're probably not writing you a PO that day.
No, and I think we're in a business world now where it's far too expensive and far too competitive to acquire new customers all the time. And so you have to develop good customers, and you have to continue to build value and expand, kind of like, I use the analogy sometimes of a band. Everybody thinks that these new bands that come out are overnight successes, and they're not. They start with a small, little cult following in their own little towns and dive bars, and they really hone their craft and get those people bought into what they have, and then they sort of expand from there. And I think that that's how sales works best as well. Is
it is.
You do the best you can, and expand from within.
And think of your favorite comedian. It's like my buddy's a big Bill Burr fan, and he thinks, he just came on the scene. No, he's been doing comedy for 25 years. He came onto your scene 2 years ago.
Right. Right.
And it was that long practice where the first 5 years he was probably a C-level comedian. Now, he blows up, but it was all that practice. And all they do is a 1 hour thing.
Yes.
Right. And we think that it's just the jokes. No, because we can all say the same jokes. Right. We can say the same words, but they're not funny.
Exactly. I think comedians are some of the brightest people on earth. They have to be, because they're creative, and they know how to take things that we've all heard a million different ways and say it slightly different and get you to laugh.
Yeah. And so did you see you as your magic, your system, learning what your market cared about and that problem domain and what a lot of people call business acumen?
I would say when I really started hitting my stride, it had to do with the fact that I was trying, this is talked about a lot these days, but it's because it's true. It's when you started to understand the why. Yeah. Why somebody, what makes them tick? What do they care about?
Their why, not your why.
Their why, not your why. Your why doesn't matter. Unless not to them. Not to them, unless they ask you. But yeah, I think that's when it started clicking for me, when I realized that, and I got some training along the way in Lean Six Sigma. And if you know anything about that, yep. there's a phrase, go to the Gemba, which means go to the place where the action is happening. And, the brilliance in that methodology is that it's like that show Undercover Boss. As you grow up the corporate ladder and you get to the top, you're further removed from the customer interaction. And so when those undercover bosses go in on those shows and they get to the ground floor, they start seeing things from a different vantage point. And, I think that changes the outlook entirely. And so I think that was sort of step one to me understanding my method, which was to understand their world first And then I think becoming more hyper focused, there's this progression that I've seen with people in sales where in the beginning you're super busy and you want to feel super busy, but you're not actually getting anything done. It's very much a shotgun approach, right? Wow, I did 6 calls today. Boss is going to be
You're
happy.
Protecting yourself from the
Getting
pain
fired.
of not knowing what you're doing. So you do what you know.
Yeah. And you also don't want to take on, the hardest challenge because you're afraid you might fail. There's a lot of fear there. So I think the second big shift was when I started realizing that there's a difference between 100 targets and 10. And when you come and focus on those 10 where you really believe that they need and can find value in what you have, that's where the match is.
And what I heard is when you can talk about what they care about, like a peer, then it goes from them having to talk to you to wanting to talk to you.
That's exactly right.
And once you have that, then you have rapport. And people think it's always just about being their friend. No, it's about speaking with them about what they care about. And all of a sudden the light goes on, and then it just naturally flows. Because I sold mostly to IT. I knew what they faced, and I could talk to them about what they cared about. And and this is even 25 years since I typed any code in, right? So I was no longer an expert.
Right.
But like you, I learned what they cared about.
Yeah. And I think you having that background and an understanding that others, that were on your team or in your company didn't have, that immediately gave you a leg up. And then it was just a matter of tailoring your system and personality to that method. And so, I think what's interesting is, when you look at like the challenger sales method, the very first step is you're picking what your personality type is. You got the lone wolf and you got the relationship seller and all these different people, yet the book's called The Challenger. So everybody wants to be the challenger when you're going through that sales training. And yet, if the relationship type guy that's always smiling when he walks in the room tries to be a challenger, that's not going to fly for him.
Well, it's simply a skill. And sometimes, certainly when the other person's even keeled, you need to provoke or have them think differently.
Yeah.
And then even in your case study, you did that in a very soft, gentle, systematic way. And I think people look at, that is all you need. And, that whole book frustrates me because how can you tell what the lone wolf is? Why are they not a challenger? You can't take this anecdotal approach to selling and think it's just one skill.
Yeah, I think that when you're going through different trainings and tailoring different things that you learn, the thing that I took away from that was I flipped it completely. Wow. I do this stuff all the time because I guess maybe that would be a dyslexia thing. But I took from that book, I was like, well, no, the beauty in this is understanding, is your customer a challenger? Is your customer a relationship builder?
Yes. Yeah.
Because if you realize what you're going up against, now that's valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you sell, you're selling to people and they're all different and they all care about different things and they're all at different stages about what you do. Most likely they're unaware or uninterested or not, maybe partially curious. So you have to start where they are and build. You don't make them start where you are because they don't care about us.
Right.
Well, did you start building your own system?
Yeah. I mean, through the years, one of the things that I've always found, that first year in medical sales, I realized I've learned so much, not from my trainings, which, that always, like, I don't want to sell that short. I certainly did. But it was from all the other interactions I had with other sellers out there and through all the mistakes I made. Yeah. And so, after that stint, I tried to, wonder if there was a way to accelerate this learning process. And
You
that's,
think? Maybe.
that's kind of where the idea of the whole pirate thing that you and I were talking about came from, which was, the system is to call on people outside your own industry where groupthink has taken place, and see what they're doing, because there's innovators out there, and if you can find them, you can pirate all the best ideas from them. So that's something I've continued to do.
And I like that because it's very similar. I call it a maverick, but pirate. It's thinking differently. Because what I found, you go in, you look at all the other sales reps, and one would be the golfer, where if he didn't know what we sold, he would just get the CIO and the CEO out in the golf course, butter them up, and he'd sell, but no one would ever use the product, so there'd be no repeat business.
Right.
Then you get the grinder who would make the 10 calls a day, a face-to-face, and he might sell something, but he's going to die when he's 35 of a heart attack, right? It just doesn't scale. So I wanted to kind of find a system because I didn't want to work 80 hours a week and I can't golf.
Right.
So,
neither can I. Can I.
And so you got to find what does work. And much like in software, if you make mistakes and instead of repeat them, I'd write them down. And I'd have a 3-page thing before each sales call. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. Do this. Do this.
I had something similar in my wallet for a long time.
And I'd be out with even my manager, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I go, "Before I go in there, I like to do this." He goes, "Let's just see what happens." He's like, "No, I'm not going to just see what happens.
We're not going to see what happens.
I got up at 4 this morning to get here."
Yeah. You go in to see what happens. That's usually not going to work out too well.
Yeah. Then you tend to have a great chat. Nothing gets accomplished, but you feel good, and there's no next step. You don't really know how interested they are. And what system did you come up with? How did you do it?
A sales system, like describe my sales system?
Yeah. I mean, you wrote a book, so you clearly aren't winging it.
Right.
So some people, it sounds like you had something in your wallet. I had a big notebook at the time. Now it's all on the computer. And it's kind of like what I teach, because if you don't have a system, you don't know what you're playing. The brain can only hold 3 to 7 things at a time, right? In the complex set, you're dealing with people, so there's hundreds of things going on.
Yeah.
And your mammal brain is kind of like taken over, like, don't lose the deal, give them a discount, do something to make something happen.
Yeah. I'll try to explain what I think my system is. So one of the first things I did was, I had read a book on self-branding, and I didn't really understand, that was thrown around a lot in the business world, and I didn't really understand the value. And, I started thinking about different people, like Joel Osteen, for instance. I've never seen his sermon, but I was pretty sure I knew what he was about. And I was also pretty sure that if it was about Joel Osteen, that nobody would go see Joel Osteen. And so I started thinking, there's value in sort of honing in what your unique style is. And I put some words around that. And so for me, it was to be, value-driven, transparent, and fearless. And so then, and that's not something you want to put on your business card, but, kind of putting some words around the type of salesperson you want to be. The interesting thing that happens is, at times when you feel like you are being a big chicken, you're like, this is part of my brand. I gotta push through. So I think there was, just like when you have to take your entire funnel of customers and kind of whittle it down, I think you don't want to try to be something you're not. And so kind of honing in on your individual style. And then the second thing was, really shifting from not just preparing for a few minutes prior to the call, but you can do so much, just like Undercover Boss, prior to the actual sales pitch. And so one of the big shifts I did is, and I'll often call it an observation. I'll come in to people's places of work prior to selling to the decision makers and learn their business. And you will be shocked shocked how many people let you into their business. Maybe I was bold because I was walking into ORs from the start. But, I think if you can learn people's business and say, what differentiates me is that I try to learn your business. I'm not saying that I know your world, but I came in and I observed how your people are doing this and how everyone interacts together so that I would be more prepared for this meeting. So that's sort of the second thing. And then the other thing is just kind of knowing from those observations and those notes how you're going to have to shift that perspective, because it's going to start, from their perspective and you're framing up their world, but then you need to have that shift. And, I found the best way to do that is through a combination of visuals and what I would call trusted sources. So, a lot of salespeople will spew off a lot of data and really good information. Yeah. And a lot of it might be very applicable. However, we all have a little bit of ADHD. And so we start, watching them not off. So I add a lot of visuals. I do a lot of storytelling. And then I also try to incorporate trusted sources, which would be, papers or studies or peer-to-peer type things. I think whether you're in medical sales or a different profession, there's always a trusted source that you can lean on.
Now, when you look around at your peers, either at this company or past companies, what do you see as really differentiating you?
Well, I'm not going to sit here and say that, I'm not still learning myself, because I am. We all are. But I guess I would say one of the things that differentiates me is how I look at closing. I think that the sales cycle is reversed as well. I think it's more in the opening. And if you do and set it up right, you'll feel confident telling them the next steps, because that's what most people really want. They you might get somebody all the way to the end and then ask these open-ended questions about, does this sound good? Would you like to do a trial?
What would you like to do next?
Yeah. And they're like, yeah, that sounds good. And then you're like, oh, walk out as a win. Well, they really don't want to have to. Change is hard. And so you have to have a plan in place, and be prepared to guide them to that next step and actually lay it out and tell them exactly what we're doing. And so I think that for me, the biggest differentiator is if you do it right and you set it up right, you can tell them the next steps. And I always tell them, well, I think about it from their vantage point, would I agree to this? Yeah. And then I my final words would be, we'll do this for a month. And if it doesn't work, you can go tell me to pound salt.
Right. And I think too many people think just giving them a proposal, they know what to do with it.
Right.
Because these are surgeons, they're not business administrators, and they may not understand what has to do next. And they may give it to the hospital administrator or procurement. And procurement looks at it and goes, this is a quote. This is not a purchase request. Right. I don't deal with quotes. I deal with purchase requests. Yeah, go get one of those. And they're like, how do I do that? And that's a lot of our value is being what I call a deal Sherpa, is like knowing that terrain and walking them through that process. Yeah. You are selling change.
That's exactly right. And that's where the observation comes in. If you've done your legwork, you sort of know the intricate parts of what they're going to be dealing with. And that's how you can help guide them through the next steps of the process. And then from there, I think another thing that I've realized over the years is how much value there is in sustaining and growing from, a small pot of customers and growing from that out. And the best way to do that is by also understanding, okay, you've decided you want to make this change, and we've identified the things that are important to you. Now let's track it. And KPIs get thrown around, and typically I think the KPI is whatever you, the seller, or your boss wants to see. But really it should be, what are the metrics or measurements that are important to the customer? Yeah. My analogy when I'm talking to salespeople is always the personal trainer. There's a reason January 1st, the gyms are full, and February 1st, they're empty.
Yeah.
The personal trainer works because they say, okay, if you do go at it as an individual, you're looking at pounds because that's all you know. And you step on the scale, you haven't lost any weight.
Right?
Yeah, you haven't lost any weight and you give up, but your personal trainer's like, well, but your body fat percentage is better.
Strength, your
cholesterol is better. Yeah. And so the pounds are coming. And so that's, why you keep going. Whereas I think if you just set a goal of reducing cost for somebody and then a month in, they haven't seen the cost reduction, you might lose.
Cool. And this has been a great conversation. Tell us a little bit about the book, and if people invested the time and money, what would they get out of it?
Yeah. So one thing that I would want to get off my chest first and foremost is, the whole concept of this came from the fact that if I can't find something, that's when I tend to try to create it. And so I could never find, and nor do I think that there'll ever be a method. I don't think there's any silver bullet to selling. So that was sort of the first aha moment. The second, I don't think, anyone out there wants to hear Tyler's take on selling because that's my own method and I'm learning as well. So what this did is I took, with the whole learning late thing, I had become a big reader. And so I had about 50 books on behavior change and influence that I had liked. So the first half of the book is Preparing for Voyage, and that's a collection of business books and ways to prepare on targeting, prospecting, decision-making, and the like. And the second half of the book is the 6 points of sale, and that's on the sales process from opening to close. And it's a collection of interviews with top sales reps that had 30 President's Club wins to their name.
Wow.
And so, and you'll see that, all these top people have their own method. They're not the same.
They're not the same.
There's not one sales type that is more successful than another. Right. It's about honing your own craft. So, what I think people would get out of the book is, you don't need a method, but you need a system. And I think it will accelerate your ability to craft your own system by learning from both the wins and mistakes of others and then the business books.
Cool. And where can people go to connect with you?
So probably the best way to find me, I guess, would be on LinkedIn, Tyler Menke, or you can, the book's actually available today, which is kind of oddly coincidental, on Amazon, The Pirate's Guide to Sales. So those would probably be the two places to find me. I love connecting with people, so feel free to reach out on LinkedIn and let's start a conversation.
How much of that sounded familiar? Building a system, not relying on a single skill or technique, to understand your sale from start to finish, and to constantly become better at it, to practice it, to get it out of your head and onto something else that you can analyze. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? That's what I learned. And I'm glad to hear it from other people, instead of people who just find like one thing, or it's all about this, or it's all about that. It's all about a lot of stuff. And that's what sales is all about. It's a performance profession, and we have to become better at it. Speaking of which, the courses have been moving to more of a case study approach. What that means is both the one-on-ones, which is a 30-minute Zoom call with me. It's unlimited, so you can schedule it as often as you want. Apply the course to your deals, your territory, your job, the stuff that you're facing, and have somebody who can help you with it, who only cares about helping you get what you want, close deals, get into new accounts. So go to b2brevenue.com, hit the training tab, take a look at the courses. There's two major ones. One is start the conversation, get the meeting. It's all about getting into new accounts, having a systematic way of dominating your territory, your total addressable market, prioritize them, and start conversations with them. It's not about pitching. It's about exactly what we talk about in this podcast. getting a conversation started with them about what they care about and coming up with a system to do it so you know how to do it every day, all day. Then, once you have it, is understanding how to close the complex sale. We touched on it in this episode where the doctor wants the product but doesn't know how to buy it. You have to teach them. And nobody teaches you. Your company doesn't know. They're like, oh, talk to Mr. Big Cheese or find the decision maker. What decision? The decision to buy it? Well, the doctor wants it, but the doctor doesn't have the administrative or the political power to get it done. So you have to guide them. And in that course, I teach you how to do it. Break it down. Prevent it from getting stuck. Because I bet a lot of this guy's deals get stuck in, I want it, I need it, I can afford it, but I don't know how to get it done. That's where we are. I teach you how companies, hospitals, governments, how they buy and how to keep it moving, how to break it down into tiny little pieces and give each person what they need to see. Also, I'm putting this up on YouTube, so you can check it out on YouTube if you'd like to see the visual of it. It's sometimes more engaging if you have time. I also put up my funny videos up on YouTube as well as on the LinkedIn company page and my personal page. I've run out of connections, so just follow me on LinkedIn and follow the company page, the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast page. That's it. I appreciate everybody listening. Make sure you're checking out our partners, covideo.com and pipedrive.com. You get Pipedrive 60 days for free with the Brutal Truth coupon code. Just check the show notes. You can just swipe up or tap the artwork. If you don't know how to get the show notes, just go to YouTube, search show notes on your phone and learn how. Appreciate everybody telling somebody about the podcast, and we'll see you next time.